This video is the first video in a series on present value. In this video, we will cover the following questions. Why is present value an important tool for decision making? We will also look at how present value is defined. In future videos, we will explore how to calculate present value using a variety of tools and different situations. Let's first answer our question about why present value is an important tool for decision making. Present value, abbreviated PV, is an important tool for companies making investment decisions. As a decision maker in a business, I am constantly deciding between multiple opportunities. Let's say I have $100,000 to invest in a project. There are several projects my team has decided could advance our company, but I only have access to enough money to invest in one project. Present value is a common quantitative tool that I might use to determine which project is the best investment. Present value allows me to consider the impact of many variables on the value of one project or of multiple projects. I can use present value to compare an estimate of the value today of different projects I am considering for the future. If all qualitative factors are equal, such as fit with corporate culture, I would want to invest in the project with the highest present value. Now that we know why a company would want to use present value, let's break down the definition. I define present value as the current value of future cash flows. Let's look at each piece of that definition. Current value means what something is worth today. We call that present value, that value today, or we say it's the value at time zero. When we get into some timelines in a minute in future problems, that reference to time zero will start to make more sense. What you need to know now is that present value is the value today, or the current value. Specifically, it's the value of cash flows. The term cash flows means the movement of cash in or out. So if I receive money, that's a cash inflow. If I pay money, that's a cash outflow. Further, those cash outflows and inflows are happening in the future, so after today, after time zero. Because these cash flows are happening in the future, present value is an estimate. We don't actually know what is going to happen in the future. When we're calculating present value, we're making our best guess about what we think will happen in the future. To review, present value is the value today, or the current value of future cash flows, of cash flows we expect to occur in the future. Cash flows can result from any investment. We're going to look at a simple example here to better understand present value and the types of cash flows we might be considering. Let's say I want to invest in a building I plan to rent out to college students. Let's assume I pay cash for the building. That initial cash payment is an outflow. We call it the initial investment in the building. Each year, I'm going to have additional cash outflows for recurring costs. These costs might be maintenance of the building and insurance for the building. Hopefully, I am also going to have cash inflows. This would include any cash I receive each month from renting the building to tenants. Another cash inflow may come from selling the building sometime in the future, when I no longer want to rent it out to tenants. As you can see from this example, the timing of cash flows will differ. Let's look at a few options for when cash flows can occur and the terminology related to the different timing of cash flows. We will come back to the example of the building we are purchasing to rent to tenants throughout the examples we explore in the remainder of the video. When we illustrate cash flows, we do so with a timeline. On this timeline, we have 5 periods. The periods are represented across the top of the timeline. This represents time. As we go through a few examples, we will write out the dollar amount of the cash flow underneath the timeline. The first type of cash flow we will consider is a lump sum cash flow. Lump sum is a single cash flow. Going back to the example of the building, an example of a lump sum cash flow would be the cash we receive from selling the building in the future. A lump sum cash flow only shows up once on the timeline, since it is a single cash flow in the future. In this example, we are looking at a lump sum cash flow of $5,000 to be received in 5 periods. I can tell this is a cash inflow because it's positive. The other kind of cash flow is an annuity. Annuities are recurring periodic payments. An annuity will show up multiple times on the timeline since annuities are recurring. In this case, we are looking at an annuity cash flow of $1,000 to be received each period for 5 periods. Going back to the building example, the rent we receive each month for tenants would be considered an annuity because rent is typically received periodically rather than all at one time. These periods associated with cash flows could be any length of time, such as years, quarters, months, or days. In this video, we will explore only annual annuities. Additionally, annuities can occur at the beginning or end of a period. In this video, we will only look at annuities that occur at the end of the period, like you see here. At the end of year 1, there's a $1,000 cash inflow, as well as at the end of year 2, 3, 4, and 5. Annuities at the end of the period are called ordinary annuities. Certain investments can involve a combination of cash flows, meaning they include both an annuity and a lump sum component. The timeline when there's both a lump sum and an annuity would then include both the recurring periodic payments for the annuity and the one-time cash flow for the lump sum. These combinations occur frequently. In the example we used earlier with the building, the monthly rent we expected to receive would be an annuity. The cash we would get when we sold the building at some point in the future would be a lump sum. Now that we understand the possible timing of cash flows, we want to better understand how we would use present value to make decisions. Let's start with a lump sum example. Would you rather have $5,000 today or $5,000 in the future? If the dollar amounts are equal, then we would always rather receive the money today. This concept is referred to as the time value of money, and it's very important to understand related to present value. Money today is worth more to us than money in the future, for a few reasons. For example, I would rather have $5,000 today than $5,000 in the future, because I can invest the $5,000 I receive today for the next 5 years and make it worth more at the end of those 5 years. Since having money today is worth more to me than having money later, $5,000 today and $5,000 in 5 years are not equal values. I would need to receive more than $5,000 in 5 years for that amount to be worth $5,000 today. Or, another way of saying that is, I would consider accepting less money today instead of waiting to get $5,000 in 5 years. Let's look at a few other examples related to how we would prefer to receive money. In this comparison, would you rather receive $5,000 in 5 years or $5,000 in 4 years? Again, we would always prefer to receive the $5,000 sooner. at the end of year 4 in this example, rather than at the end of year 5. We could take the $5,000 at the end of year 4 and invest it for 1 year to make more than $5,000 by the end of year 5. So the $5,000 at the end of year 4 is more valuable to us than $5,000 at the end of year 5. Let's look at another scenario. Would you prefer to have $5,000 at the end of 5 years or $1,000 at the end of each year for 5 years? So this is an example of a lump sum versus an annuity. It's still $5,000 either way, but there's different value because of the time value of money. Remember, we always want to receive the money sooner rather than later. So we would prefer the $1,000 each year for 5 years rather than waiting for the end of 5 years to get all $5,000. Without doing any calculations, we can see that we would rather the second option because at least I get some of the cash flows sooner rather than waiting until the end of 5 years. Let's look at one last example for this video. Would you prefer to receive $4,000 at the end of year 4 or $4,500 at the end of year 5? This comparison is a little more difficult to determine by looking at it or just thinking about it. $4,000 is pretty close to $4,500, and we only have to wait 1 period to get $500 more dollars. So to compare these two options, we really need to calculate present value. In video 2, I will walk through the formula to calculate present value. In video 3, I will then walk through other tools you can use to calculate present value, such as Excel